What's up, guys? It is Sam here, and I am coming to you from my bedroom, where I wanted to talk about the Democratic candidates for president. What I wanted to do was take a look at how these candidates are polling, take a look at some of those polls, and then walk through my analysis of what is actually taking place and see if that coincides with the polls, and just present the data in a way that you can decide what's actually going on here versus what the news is reporting. So, with that being said, if this is your first time here, what's up? I'm Sam, and if you're returning, it's good to freaking see you. Don't forget to press that subscribe button. I wanted to start with this survey. It is from the period, just because it's so recent. It is from, by the way, this is also not hooked up at all. Just a prop. What's up? This data is from August 1st through the 5th, so this is pretty recent data. The poll was done by a company called Survey USA America's Pollster, or that's who sponsored it, at least. And it has Joe Biden at 33%, Bernie Sanders at 20%, Elizabeth Warren at 19%, Kamala Harris at 9%, and then South Bend and Pete or something. Pete Buttigieg has 8%, and everybody else has 3% or something combined. And then there was another one, more specifically talking about the Iowa voter opinion, and this was out of Monmouth University. They also had Biden as number 1, Sanders is number 2, Warren is number 3, Kamala Harris is number 4, and Pete Buttigieg, however you say his last name, as number 5. What we're going to get into in a minute is some stuff on Andrew Yang, and he is not in the list here of like the top 10 at all. Also, he is not mentioned at all in the first. So then let's go to a much more prestigious name, I guess you could call, based on the legacy view of the world. That would be Rolling Stone, right? People like to think that they're creditable, right? So let's go take a look at their list, which was published on July 26th of 2019. So, about 2 weeks ago, a little bit over 2 weeks ago. And they have Joe Biden as number 1, Elizabeth Warren is number 2, Bernie Sanders is number 3, and Kamala Harris is number 4. Pete, and then they, if you come all the way down the list, at number 12, you have Andrew Yang. I wanted to point that out. Number 12 right here, and this is from the Rolling Stones. So then, lastly, there's another website that is called Real Clear Politics, and they aggregate, which just means like put together, the data from polls. So they have been gathering this data since late last year, I believe. Or probably way longer than that, but I just looked at it since like the beginning of the year. And you get to see how people are trending based upon these polls that are published by independent bodies that are aggregated through this site. And over the past 6 months, you've seen Joe Biden has a significant margin above all the other candidates by quite a ways, and has actually grown it over the last 3 months on average, with it coming a little bit closer together recently, but then widening out again. And then the second person for, like, say 4 of the past 6 months was Bernie Sanders, and over the last, like, 2 months, Bernie Sanders has lost some of that according to the polls, and Michaela Harris and Warren have stepped up, so it's kind of like the 3 of those lines have been coming together. This is what it actually looks like that I just described. In this area, it kind of comes together a little bit. So now, what I want to do, since that's the data from the old players, that's what's reported in the media, that's what, like, our grandparents watch on television, or parents, or maybe you watch on television. I'm not sure. I don't own TV. But now let's take a really macro view of the United States, and try to get maybe there's a different gauge out there that is more relevant than this polling data that some statistician and linguist created these questions along with a psychologist to try to get some type of understanding of the person that was going to be answering these questions, and maybe how they might answer these questions. And maybe there's a better indicator of what's actually happening, what's more important, what's more relevant. So that led me to Google Trends. If you've ever used Google Trends before, it's pretty awesome. On Google Trends, you can look at search terms over different time periods, which is very interesting, right? Because that's actual information that's not in the form of a question, so it's more valid than a poll, because this is actual reality here. And we can compare that, right? So if we have data on Joe Biden, Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, Michaela, or what's her, Kamala, whatever her name is, Harris, and Andrew Yang, and see what that data looks like compared to the polls, right? Maybe you would think if, right, Joe Biden is actually winning, that he would probably also control more of the web search traffic, right? Or the YouTube traffic, because he's more interesting, because that's what people are talking about, right? However, let's take a look at the data and see what the data actually tells us. So I've got this up here. Over the last 12 months, we get to see that on average, Harris, Kamala, has seen the most search traffic on Google. And Bernie Sanders and Joe Biden have been very close, but Harris is ahead, with Elizabeth Warren bringing up a few spots back, and then Andrew Yang at like half of what Elizabeth Warren is at. So he's like just super minuscule. This is over the past 12 months. So now let's jump into 90 days. And over the past 90 days, it has pretty much the same thing, except for Harris is very similar to Joe Biden, and there's a much more compression of what's going on, except for Andrew Yang doesn't, still significantly less than everybody else, but all the others have come together a little bit more. So then let's go to over the last 30 days, and we see now that Andrew has the same as Elizabeth Warren in terms of search traffic. So he has significantly grown the interest of people enough to have them search for his name on Google. So that's pretty significant to get that much relevance. when CNN isn't even reporting about him at all, or other companies are they just don't have any incentive to like find the actual data. It's kind of ridiculous. So I just to really dive into the nitty gritty of what's actually happening at the moment, I pulled up in the past 24 hours. And over the past 24 hours, he has had the most amount of search traffic by quite a large margin. The next closest person is Biden, and he's probably got 30 to 40% on in terms of the amount of traffic he's getting versus Joe Biden. And then the super micro, right, over the last hour, he is also leading. Not it doesn't look like by as much, but he is also leading by search traffic. So another macro view that we can get into is the same exact scope. However, now we can look at YouTube. I think that YouTube is important from the standpoint that this gives a lot of information about the strategy somebody is taking and if they're connecting with the audience in terms of what's relevant to the actual audience. And this is kind of interesting. So again, we're going to start very wide. We're going to start with the same people 12 months out. Now, this is on YouTube, not on Google. Because remember, on Google search, Andrew Yang had like half of the lowest person, which was Elizabeth Warren. But on YouTube search, he's number 2 behind Bernie Sanders. So that's kind of interesting. Different than Google search. It's on YouTube. And this is 12 months out. So that's kind of interesting. And me just actually seeing the data, you can see that roughly 6 months ago, the trend for Andrew Yang has just been up and to the right. Volatile, but up and to the right. So let's zoom in some more to the past 90 days to get a better idea of like what's going on. And Andrew Yang is the most searched out of those 5 people on YouTube, with the least being Elizabeth Warren. So that was kind of interesting. So he is definitely winning on YouTube. What he's doing with his strategy of content on YouTube, but more than likely in terms of the strategy on YouTube, I think it's the ability to communicate an authenticity through your message in terms of whatever you're trying to achieve. And I think he's winning on YouTube because of that. And the data shows that as well, but we're supposed to be looking at the data, not pontificating about what our thoughts are on something. So let's zoom in again to the past 30 days and see what that data looks like. Again, he is the most searched in the past 30 days, with Bernie Sanders as number 2. And why Bernie Sanders might be number 2 is going to be pretty evident in the next section when I get into covering each individual candidate's YouTube channel specifically, and analyzing their YouTube channel and their strategy on that, and then into that data. So remember that in the past 90 days and year, the next closest person on YouTube behind Andrew Yang was Bernie Sanders. So there's a reason for that. Okay, so now we're going to jump to the past 24 hours. This is the most recent information. And Andrew has probably a 20 to 35% increase over Bernie Sanders in terms of the traffic on YouTube, with virtually nothing from Kamala Harris and Elizabeth Warren, and a tiny bit for Joe Biden, but like at least 3 times the amount for Andrew Yang than Joe Biden. So that's very interesting. And then let's just jump to the 1 hour. This is like what's going on right now. And we see that Andrew Yang also has the most amount of search traffic on YouTube, with Bernie Sanders coming in behind him, Joe Biden coming in next, Kamala Harris coming in at fourth, when Elizabeth Warren, let's remember that, because she's just done not good on YouTube when we're looking at these. She has not done well at all. Actually, before we get into the YouTube channel, I forgot about this section. We are going to be covering the trending hashtags associated with each one of these candidates. And the hashtag is just going to be their name. And through Hashtagify me, we get to track they have a gauge for popularity, recent popularity, and the monthly trend for this hashtag, and a little graph over the last 2 months, so you get to see how it's doing. So after this section, we do go into the YouTube channel analysis. But before we do that, we looked up Joe Biden. He's got popularity of 51.4 according to this. This is pulling data from Twitter. 44%, or it doesn't say percent, it just says 44 in terms of recent popularity. So he's probably going slightly more recent, gained some popularity. His monthly to the month trend for this hashtag is down 4%. And if we look at over the last 2 months, it does look like there's a clear down to the right trend, not what you'd want to see in terms of gaining popularity. So let's take a look at the next person, Bernie Sanders. He's got much higher popularity at 66.8 versus what Joe Biden's is at 51.4. Same thing, with the recent popularity. He's gained more recent popularity, 47.6 versus Joe Biden's 44. He has also lost steam, it looks like 2% on the monthly trend. And actually, when you come down and look at over the last 2 months, I wouldn't say it's basically flat, which is negative 2%, I guess. But over the last 2 months, it's pretty much been stagnant. It's basically just a straight fucking line. Next is Elizabeth Warren. She is 51.5% for the popularity, and not as much on the recent popularity, 38 on that. But the trend of her hashtag is also down 2% relatively speaking. And the look on hers is actually down to the right as well, except for at the end it spikes up. So at the tip of the spike, it's kind of like up here. So it's hard to tell where this one go. If something potentially happened, I could see an increase in her. If this trend continued, I could see an increase in her popularity based on the data coming from Twitter, which was kind of interesting. The next person we have is Kamala Harris. She's got close to a 49.4 for popularity. She's much more on the recent indicator they have, which is 50.5. Although over the past month, her trend for her name as a hashtag was down 6%. Maybe people couldn't spell it. That could go into this. I feel like that could go into this. For hers, it does look like the overall trend is down to the right as well, which I feel like either this is not a great indicator of relevance, or because most of these candidates, you would expect their relevance to be up and to the right as we moved through the debate period. So that is kind of interesting. Pretty much all of them, except for Bernie, have been down and to the right over time. The next is Andrew Yang. He has the lowest in terms of popularity on the hashtag probably usage. His is 38.9. The recent popularity is kind of towards the middle of the pack with a 46. However, his monthly trend is up 3%. So he is the only one who's been up in terms of the usage for his name as a hashtag. And his graph is the only graph that looks like it came from the bottom and is trending up and to the right over the last 2 months. So he looks like he is the only candidate out of these five that has the hashtag as his name up and to the right. Now, you could argue that the volume of use of somebody's hashtag as their name might not have a great indicator of whether somebody is going to be the candidate for president for the Democratic Party. However, I think anybody with a little bit of intuition could see that the potential where it actually might have a huge impact when considering the size of these platforms that we're talking about online, Twitter and YouTube and Facebook and Instagram. And these platforms are so big, and when you're a politician and you're using the old guard as gauges to understand how you're doing, you're using false metrics to kind of game plan your strategy versus actually looking at the data to see how you're doing and make adjustments as need be, like what's working and what's not working. So I think it is a good gauge. The next thing that we wanted to jump into is some little YouTube analysis here. So first, we're just going to take a look at what's going on YouTube. Is there anything going on YouTube with these candidates? So we're going to look at the total number of subscribers and kind of their content strategy in terms of frequency. So first up is Joe Biden.